looks like we've got another caller in the queue. Magic may be real due to the complexity of the human body. So I'm going to bring Stephen up. Stephen, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, excellent. Hit us with it.
So remember I called last time when you and Richard Gilliver were on?
Yes, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, so I was talking about how magic could be real because the human body, because of how the human body heals itself from things like infections or poisons.
Yeah, I remember.
Which I'm agnostic to.
Right.
But it's a theory I had, and I wanted to explain why it makes more sense than a god.
Okay. Sure.
What?
Yeah, go for it. I'd love to hear it.
Before I do that, I want to briefly explain why spirituality might not make everything function perfectly, because I didn't really explain last time.
Okay.
Because it might be not unconscious or it might be semi-conscious, meaning that it might, if it's unconscious, it would work kind of like you know how in media there's spells? Spells are not necessarily conscious, but they lead to a certain, they still dictate things and make things go in a certain direction.
Okay.
Or it could be semi-conscious, meaning it could be conscious, but the consciousness is too weak to make really perfect decisions. Does that clarify anything?
Hold on. Let me fill in the audience, and then if I miss something, you can fill in that gap as well, just so in case they didn't see that episode, they know what the heck we're talking about. So last time we spoke, and you're agnostic, you're not a Christian, and you talked about the likelihood that magic and spirituality was more likely to, and correct me if I'm wrong, feel free to step in and correct me, was more likely to explain basically the existence of the world and the universe that we know today, more so than God. And you were saying how the presence of things like automated systems in the human body and automated systems in nature were evidence that spirituality and that magic exists around us. And I remember Richard and I were saying, how is that evidence of magic as opposed to just nature doing what nature does? And then Richard and I gave examples of birth defects and things like that, as it doesn't always work. Magic, you would think that magic would make sure that it worked, but it doesn't always work. And what we don't see are the failed systems that didn't work and didn't survive. And so that's kind of where we left off, was if it is magic, why does not everything occur perfectly? And that's what you're calling in to clarify.
Yeah, that was just a brief point I wanted to clarify. But my main point is why it makes more sense than a god, because I didn't really explain that much last time.
Yeah. Last time we kind of got into the weeds, so I'm glad you get to do kind of a part two this time. So you're saying that magic and spirituality existing and controlling things doesn't necessarily guarantee that it'll happen perfectly every time, but that you have evidence to suggest it would still work better than a theist god.
Yes.
Okay, so hit us with it. What is it that says that to you or proves that to you?
First of all, gods and religions like Christianity, for example, directly go against science. For example, things like the age of the Earth. We know that the Earth is billions of years old, but theists claim it's just a few thousand years old, I think. So
yeah, yep.
And it goes against evolution and other things, whereas my theory doesn't.
Okay,
that's one reason.
Okay, so in your opinion, what sounds different when you talk about magic than people who talk about God or blessings from God? What is it that makes your hypothesis or your theory more realistic or believable than the things that are said by Christians and religious individuals of other religions?
Well, God, with religions, there's things like angels and the Garden of Eden, and a serpent told Adam and Eve to eat an apple, and it caused sin. You know, it sounds like a fairy tale in some ways. That's one reason. and God would be a separate entity from the world that's completely conscious and that takes the form of a human. Like, for example, mouth, eyes, nose, ears, like before the human form even existed on Earth. And I don't think that makes any sense.
So what is it about magic that makes more sense to you than religion? I think that that's a question that a lot of people would have listening to this, is to them kind of sounds the same. The same questions exist in both instances. And so what is it about spirits and magic that to you says this makes a lot more sense than a god, than say like a conscious being, as opposed to magic? And where does the magic come from if we don't have a god?
I think magic would be like either invisible or would just look like space itself. And I think it's a force that has always been there.
Isn't that God, an invisible force that's always been there?
Or nature?
Yeah, or nature.
Well,
the laws of nature.
God takes on the form of like a human and is really, really all-knowing. And if he was real, he should be able to literally make everything perfect. Like if he's all-knowing and could do literally anything, I think he would be able to make anything go his way. And also, if a God has been there for all eternity, why wouldn't he, for at least just a few seconds or a few minutes, pop up and say that he's real, since there's so many non-believers?
I mean, that's a great question. I've been asking myself that question forever. Yeah. I guess my thought is, or my question for you is, to me, and Kelley, feel free to step in. I don't want to talk for more than 5% of this episode. Sorry. For, in my opinion, those two schools of thought sound the same to me. The likelihood that both of those are the way things are just as unlikely, in my opinion, based on the exact same reasons. Say, for example, the invisibility of it all, the metaphysical of it all, the just believing what somebody else is theorizing or telling me is the way it is. Why is it that we should be more likely to believe your version of events, where there is still an invisible force controlling everything, where there is still no physical being in front of us that is supposed to answer questions for us? What about it makes that the better response and makes you, as an agnostic, say religion's ridiculous?
It doesn't sound like a fairy tale, and it just makes more sense, and it reflects the world more, because the world isn't perfect, obviously. God, if he's perfect and all-knowing, should basically make everything run perfectly, but that doesn't reflect the world either, and it just sounds more unrealistic and not as plausible.
To you, though, I think is the main point we're trying to make.
I need to ask this question. Yeah. You keep saying that religion is a fairy tale, but you have to understand that to us, magic seems like a fairy tale. And we're trying to ask you how we know that this magic that you speak of, and I'm not sure how you're defining it, actually, I'm a bit confused, is any different than anybody else's ideas of what a religion is.
In religion, there's also so many entities and like like
not necessarily. There's not. There are some religions that have nothing to do with supernatural entities, right? It seems like you're lumping all religions into the ones that you know about. But again, how is it that you can show that this magic that you speak of is not different than any other idea of a religion or a religious thought?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that show us why it's not a religion. I'm trying to get you to show us why your idea is different and knowable when that other idea is not knowable.
Well, also my idea is up for interpretation. It's agnostic. With religions, like they have like this exact layout of it without evidence.
That was kind of my point.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's kind of my point. That when you say these things, that's like just the way you see the world. And you're trying to convince us that that's the way the world is, but you haven't given us anything to convince us of that. All you've said is that religion is a fairy tale. But again, and I want to stress this, that to us, from our perspective, the magic that you are speaking of is also a fairy tale. And how can we tell the difference between the two fairy tales?
And maybe it's helpful if I break it down this way. And also, Kelley, correct me if this isn't your thought process. Maybe this is just mine. When I hear both perspectives, I hear in both of them, there's an unseen force controlling all things that are going on. In both of them, the controlling force does not have to make things go perfect each time, even though it theoretically could. In both like ideas, in both thoughts, schools of thought, it's basically out of our control as human beings what happens, whether it's positive or negative. And to me, both of those sound equally as implausible. The only difference is you're calling yours magic, while the other aspect is kind of like you were saying, fairy tale, like giving it a name, giving it an origin, giving it a history, giving it a personification. But in my mind, the only difference between the two is the lack of personification, and it sounds like there's no punishment in your version of what magic controlling everything would be. Am I saying that correctly? Am I breaking that down correctly?
Yeah, you are correct. If there was an aspect of punishment, that would be like a fairy tale. It would be really unrealistic at that point. Yeah.
So then what do we do with this information? Say, for example, we discover that magic or spirituality of some kind is controlling everything. Is there anything we can do? Is there anything we can improve on? Or are we literally just hands off, magic take the wheel, what happens, happens?
No, we could still improve on things by using our brain.
Okay, like what is something that... So I guess if we were to discover, say we wake up tomorrow and they're like, guys, we've discovered that magic actually runs everything, that's been it the whole time. As human beings, is there anything that we should do differently now that we know that information? Is there any way that we can help this magic or benefit from this magic or improve our lives now that we know it's magic? Or will it literally not change anything? We just continue to live our lives day to day and magic will do what magic has been doing the whole time?
It might not change anything, but we could use our consciousness to do things. And, well, also, it's never been studied, so I don't really know the answer.
Would the magic be something that we could please or displease?
I don't think it's that conscious where it cares about an admiration.
Okay. And
what kind of consciousness does it have then?
Yeah.
I mean, you're the one that brought up its consciousness. Can you kind of, like I said, I'm still kind of not fully understanding what exactly you mean by magic. So the more you can define it for us, I think the better off we'll be.
Maybe a semi-conscious, unnatural force that dictates things in life and leads things in a certain way and forms things in a certain way, like living organisms. That's what I would say.
And if it's semi-conscious, how is that different from a god?
Because a god would be completely conscious.
Mm.
And also take on...
or would just the gods that you would... See, wait. When you say that because the god would be fully conscious, is that true? Or is that just true of all the gods that you can think of? Like, is that true of all of your concepts of God? And this is something that I've been trying to think, and maybe I'm doing a poor job of it, but I'm trying to show that you've got this certain perspective, right? And you're saying that this perspective is right, but you're not showing us how that perspective is right, or how that perspective affects the world as a whole. You're just like saying this thing exists without being able to show how or why this thing exists or what it does.
I know it's not really measurable, but it's like an inference based off the convenience of the human body and also the bodies of any living organism.
So it's an inference. It's not real. It's just an inference.
But I think it could be real, I think. Because,
but you're the one that used the word inference, not I.
Oh, maybe I think of inference as theory, so.
I just think of it as just inferring something, whether, I mean, I can infer all kinds of things, right? I'm sorry, I was an English major when I first went to college, so I'm really getting into words and the way people use them, so.
Yeah.
So is this something that you think people would benefit from knowing? So is this something that you think you would want more people to know? Do you think it would benefit people at all? Do you think it would be a negative thing to never know this information? Say, for example, if magic was in fact what was running everything. What are your thoughts on the basic proselytization of letting people know that magic is actually how things run?
I don't know if it would necessarily make a huge change. We would just have more understanding, I guess.
Does it bring you any kind of peace or reassurance in any way?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any other thoughts you have on the matter that you think we should know?
Stephen, do you understand do you know what the Tao is? From Taoism, like secular Taoism?
No.
Because your concept sounds very similar to that concept. So that, and it was something that, as a philosophy, as a way to look at the world, it was something that I followed for many years, and I feel today like I've been able to change my ideas about that, because I never actually saw any concrete evidence that anything like that really existed. It was just my hoping that things were working that way. Is that something, and I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, but is that something that you've thought about?
Oh, it's not like wishful thinking. It's just like something like it's not.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
I want it to be. It's not like that, really. Yeah.
What I'm saying is that you're looking at the world, the whole world, through a lens that you want to see the world through. So you're putting implications into the things you see. Is that, and I'm not saying you are doing that. I'm just asking you if you've ever thought about that. That when I look at it, like, did you ever hear the story about the blind man and the elephant? And one thinks it's like a snake, and one thinks he's like a tree, and one thinks he's rough like sand, like a big rough stucco wall, right? And it was all because the blind man touched a different part of the elephant, right? And so they all had a different idea because of their perceptions. So I'm asking you if you've ever thought about that I'm seeing the world through this perception that I want to see it through. And by doing that, I'm seeing this magic that I want to believe in.
I'm agnostic about it. I'm not like, I don't claim anything as like a fact. I'm still I'm still trying to find the correct answer, but I think this is a good theory, basically.
Okay. All right. Well, Stephen, we appreciate you calling back. It was interesting to get to continue this conversation. And if you, in the future, if you think of any additional like theories or things like that to support this idea, we'd love to have you call back and tell us more about it, because I think the continued conversation is important to make sure we understand. But I'm going to let you go, because unfortunately we got to move on to announcements and calls things. But thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate you.